The fishing boat Wayward Compass drifts through waters where dawn meets night in colors that photographers chase but never capture, its modest frame carrying 37 years of repairs that speak of necessity rather than choice, of making do rather than replacing, of survival through adaptation that poverty teaches more effectively than prosperity ever could. Evanroe guides her through familiar currents with movements that encompass both practiced skill and automatic routine, understanding that predictable existence provides security that ambition might threaten through risks that financial stability cannot support. The nets that trail behind encompass hope, measured in practical terms. Enough catch to cover fuel costs, boat payments, and simple food that sustains existence without luxury, but maintains independence that employment might eliminate through obligations to others whose schedules and expectations could reshape daily routine according to external demands, rather than personal preference for solitary. Work that requires accountability only to tied schedules and weather patterns that operate according to natural rather than human authority. The cottage that waits on shore provides anchor for existence that encompasses both retreat from social complexity and refuge for thoughts that isolation permits without interference from conversations requiring diplomacy rather than honesty, courtesy rather than comfortable silence, performance rather than authentic presence that solitude protects through geographic separation from communities. Membership demands participation in activities that drain rather than restore emotional resources that introversion guards carefully. But it is morning discovery that transforms predictable routine into circumstances that challenge understanding about natural boundaries between possible and impossible, between myth and reality, between ordinary existence and involvement in events whose scope extends far beyond individual preference for simple life focused on survival rather than adventure that stories describe, but personal XP. Rience has never encompassed through encounters with extraordinary circumstances. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The weight that strains nets beyond normal capacity for local fish species creates recognition that morning catch encompasses something requiring immediate investigation, despite preference for routine, that avoids complications extending beyond simple marine life, whose processing follows familiar patterns that experience has reduced to automatic response, requiring minimal conscious attention while permitting mental focus on peaceful observation of oceanic environment whose beauty provides compensation for economic limitations. What the hell? Evan mutters while adjusting winch controls that struggle with burden exceeding normal equipment capacity, creating mechanical stress that threatens damage requiring expensive repair despite curiosity about unusual catch, whose nature becomes increasingly intriguing as hauling progress reveals shapes that defy classification according to familiar marine species whose characteristics Cease experience has cataloged through years of commercial fishing. The form that emerges from tangled netting encompasses dimensions that suggest human proportions, combined with aquatic adaptations, whose presence challenges rational explanation, while creating immediate recognition that discovery encompasses more than simple marine biology phenomenon, making response dependent on decisions about disclosure that could affect not just individual privacy, but broader questions about scientific investigation that fame-seeking might motivate, despite personal preference for anonymous existence. Mermaid, he whispers with voice that acknowledges impossible reality, while mind struggles to process visual evidence that contradicts lifetime of assumption about natural boundaries between terrestrial and oceanic life forms, creating cognitive dissonance that encompasses both wonder and practical concern about responsibility that discovery creates for individual whose resources barely sustain simple existence without additional complications. The unconscious figure whose delicate features combine human beauty with aquatic characteristics that encompass gill slits, scale patterns, and fin modifications that speak of evolutionary adaptation to underwater environment, lies motionless within netting, whose entanglement suggests struggle rather than peaceful rest, creating urgency that encompasses both humanitarian obligation and practical necessity for providing assistance whose scope remains uncertain. Easy now, he murmurs while carefully extracting her from nets whose design creates increasing constriction through movement that struggling would worsen, requiring patient manipulation rather than forceful removal that could worsen injuries whose extent remains unknown, despite obvious exhaustion that accompanies whatever circumstances brought oceanic being to surface waters where commercial fishing operates. The transport to boat deck requires careful handling that encompasses both respect for obvious vulnerability and practical concern about physical characteristics that differ significantly from human anatomy, while maintaining essential similarity that permits basic first aid whose application addresses immediate medical necessity, despite uncertainty about physiology whose requirements might exceed. Normal emergency response capabilities. Breathing, he observes with relief, while checking vital signs that indicate life despite unconsciousness, whose duration suggests either injury or exhaustion, that recovery requires through rest rather than immediate medical intervention, that boat resources cannot provide except through basic supportive care until consciousness returns to permit communication about specific needs. The examination that basic caution requires reveals both beauty that encompasses otherworldly quality and evidence of recent stress that encompasses both physical trauma and psychological distress, whose manifestation through unconsciousness suggests escape from circumstances requiring desperate measures rather than casual surface exploration that merpeople might undertake according to Folklore W. Poe's accuracy personal experience cannot verify. Where did you come from? He asks unconscious figure, while adjusting boat heading towards secluded cove, whose geographic protection provides privacy that discovery requires until consciousness permits discussion about circumstances whose revelation could affect both individual safety and broader implications about interspecies contact, that premature disclosure might complicate through unwanted attention from authorities are researchers. The cove that serves regular fishing provides both shelter and concealment, whose importance encompasses protection from observation, that extraordinary discovery demands while creating environment that recovery permits without external pressure about decisions whose scope extends beyond immediate medical assistance to encompass longer-term questions about responsibility and discretion that circumstances require. The hours that follow encompass both vigilant observation that monitors vital signs and practical preparation for conversation, whose content remains unpredictable, despite certainty that consciousness will restore communication ability, whose exercise might reveal information requiring immediate response to requests for assistance, whose scope could extend far beyond individual capability to provide, through resources that simple fishing existence provides. Water, the voice that emerges from returning consciousness, carries harmonics that resonate with frequencies. Human hearing rarely encounters while conveying meaning that transcends language barriers through universal recognition of basic necessity, whose provision addresses immediate physiological requirement that recovery demands. Salt water, she clarifies with precision, that indicates both awareness of physiological requirements and cognitive function that consciousness restoration permits, despite obvious weakness that recent trauma has created through circumstances whose nature remains unknown, despite growing certainty that assistance involves more than simple humanitarian obligation. I'm Evan, he introduces, while providing requested water, whose temperature and salinity approximate oceanic conditions that boat location permits through seawater, that proximity to natural environment makes available for species whose physiology requires specific chemical composition rather than fresh water that terrestrial life forms prefer. Serena, she responds with voice that carries authority beneath exhaustion, while eyes that hold depth suggesting experience beyond apparent physical age assess his appearance with evaluation that encompasses both gratitude for assistance and careful judgment about character, whose assessment determines whether circumstances permit honesty about situation requiring extraordinary trust between Stoddard. Angers. How did you end up in my nets? Not accident. She replies with certainty that encompasses both factual knowledge about circumstances and growing recognition that encounter serves purposes larger than coincidence, through events whose orchestration suggests intention rather than random occurrence, whose timing creates opportunity for contact that normal circumstances would prevent. Meaning? Prophecy brings human savior to oceanic crisis, requiring terrestrial intervention. She explains with directness that encompasses both cultural context and personal assessment of character, whose evaluation supports prophetic identification, despite obvious reluctance that assumption creates about involvement in circumstances, extending beyond personal preference for simple existence. The revelation that transforms accidental rescue into prophetic encounter creates recognition that routine fishing expedition has evolved into circumstances requiring decisions about involvement in events whose scope extends far beyond individual capability or desire to participate in situations demanding resources that simple existence cannot provide through lifestyle focused on survival, rather than heroic intervention. "I'm not hero material," Evan protests with honesty that encompasses both accurate self-assessment and instinctive resistance to responsibilities, whose magnitude exceeds personal capacity for leadership or adventure that stories describe. But practical experience has never provided through existence focused on routine rather than extraordinary achievement, requiring courage that circumstances have never demanded. Heroes choose involvement despite personal preference when circumstances require intervention that serves purposes larger than individual comfort. Cyrena responds with wisdom that encompasses both cultural understanding about human psychology and personal assessment of character, whose potential she recognizes despite his obvious reluctance about accepting prophetic designation. What kind of intervention? Sea Kingdom faces constitutional crisis, requiring external assistance that oceanic law permits only through human agency, she explains with political context that encompasses both immediate emergency and broader implications about territorial sovereignty, whose protection requires unconventional solutions when internal resources prove inadequate for addressing threats. The explanation that establishes scope of crisis requiring human intervention creates understanding that personal involvement encompasses not just individual assistance, but participation in political resolution, whose success determines oceanic sovereignty, while failure could affect broader environmental stability, through consequences extending beyond underwater territories to encompass coastal regions whose welfare depends on oceanic political stability. As afternoon conversation reveals depth of crisis requiring immediate attention, despite personal reluctance to abandon simple existence for involvement in circumstances whose complexity exceeds comfortable understanding, Evan recognizes that prophetic encounter has created obligations that moral responsibility cannot easily dismiss. Despite preference for routine, that involvement would permanently disrupt through consequences that heroic action typically encompasses. The evening that follows initial revelation encompasses gradual disclosure of political complexity that transforms theoretical crisis into personal understanding about underwater civilization, whose stability affects not just oceanic territories, but broader environmental balance whose disruption could reshape coastal existence through consequences that extend far beyond political boundaries to NC. En passe ecological disaster affecting millions of lives dependent on marine ecosystem health. Corrupt Sea King. Nereon maintains authority through fear rather than legitimate governance, Cyrena explains, while strength returns through rest that boat sanctuary provides, creating opportunity for detailed exposition about political circumstances whose resolution requires external intervention that internal resources cannot accomplish, despite obvious necessity for regime change that serves oceanic welfare. Traditional authority structure operates through inherited position, whose legitimacy depends on popular acceptance rather than simple bloodline succession. She continues, with constitutional context that encompasses both historical precedent and current crisis whose origin traces to authoritarian expansion that violates ancient agreements about balanced governance serving collective rather than individual welfare. Ancient laws prevent oceanic citizens from deposing ruler whose authority, however corrupted, maintains technical legitimacy through inheritance that formal challenge could destabilize despite practical necessity for leadership change. She explains with legal framework that encompasses both protective traditions and current paralysis, whose resolution requires external agency operating beyond institutional restrictions, meaning revolution remains impossible despite popular desire for leadership change. Meaning revolution requires catalyst that operates outside oceanic legal structure while serving oceanic welfare through intervention that ancient prophecy specifically permits when circumstances demonstrate necessity for external assistance. Cyrena clarifies with prophetic context that transforms legal restriction into opportunity for unprecedented cooperation between terrestrial and oceanic authority. The explanation that establishes both crisis scope and legal framework for intervention creates understanding that personal involvement encompasses not just individual adventure, but participation in constitutional resolution, whose success preserves oceanic sovereignty. while establishing precedent for interspecies cooperation that could benefit both communities through shared environmental stewardship rather than isolated territorial management. What specific intervention does prophecy require? Recovery of crown trident whose theft enabled corrupt authority, while proper restoration establishes legitimate governance through sacred artifact, whose possession confirms royal authority according to ancient law that both tradition and popular recognition validate. Serena explains with specific objective that encompasses both practical goal and symbolic achievement, whose completion serves political resolution. Trident location remains secret, that corruption guards through violence while access requires capabilities that oceanic forces cannot employ without violating neutrality laws that external intervention specifically exempts through prophetic framework. She continues with tactical information that encompasses both challenge scope and strategic advantage that human agency provides through legal exemption. Meaning I could retrieve artifact that mer people cannot legally pursue. Meaning you could accomplish recovery that serves oceanic welfare through intervention that prophecy specifically authorizes while ancient law protects from retaliation. Serena confirms with recognition that human participation provides solution to legal paradox, whose resolution requires external assistance operating according to prophetic rather than conventional authority. The tactical discussion that emerges encompasses both immediate planning requirements and longer-term implications about success, whose achievement establishes not just political resolution, but personal relationship, whose development operates beyond simple cooperation to encompass emotional connection that shared purpose creates through circumstances that normal social interaction would never prove. Personal involvement requires sustained cooperation that encompasses both dangerous mission and extended partnership. Evan observes with recognition that artifact recovery demands more than single adventure through relationship, whose development serves both practical necessity and growing personal attraction that circumstances have created despite initial reluctance about prophetic designation. Cooperation that serves both oceanic welfare and personal connection, whose development transcends simple alliance to encompass emotional bond. Serena acknowledges with honesty about feelings whose growth operates alongside political necessity, through compatibility that shared isolation and mutual respect have created despite species differences. Attraction that encompasses both individual compatibility and recognition of character qualities that prophetic selection identified, despite personal modesty about heroic capability. She continues with assessment that encompasses both emotional honesty and practical evaluation of qualities, whose combination serves both personal relationship and mission success.
The conversation that acknowledges mutual attraction creates foundation for partnership, whose scope encompasses both political cooperation and personal relationship through circumstances that have demonstrated compatibility, despite obvious differences in background, environment, and social expectations that normal courtship would need to navigate through conventional, rather than extraordinary
circumstances. Mission planning requires consideration of both tactical necessities and personal safety when involvement encompasses significant risk. Evan states with recognition that heroic action demands careful preparation rather than impulsive adventure, despite prophetic framework that suggests inevitable success through divine rather than personal capability. Risk assessment that encompasses both immediate dangers and longer-term consequences when success establishes political resolution, while failure could eliminate both mission opportunity and personal survival. Serena agrees with tactical realism that acknowledges both prophetic support and practical necessity for competent execution, whose achievement requires both courage and intelligence. Trident location within Abyssal Palace, whose defenses encompass both magical protection and conventional security that infiltration must overcome through stealth rather than direct confrontation. She explains with specific intelligence that encompasses both architectural knowledge and defensive assessment whose accuracy determines tactical approach. Underwater infiltration requires magical assistance that temporary transformation provides while maintaining human agency that legal exemption demands. She continues with practical solution that encompasses both biological necessity for underwater operation and legal requirement for human, rather than oceanic intervention. The magical transformation that permits underwater breathing encompasses both practical necessity and symbolic significance, whose scope extends beyond simple biological adaptation to represent partnership, that transcends species boundaries through cooperation, that serves mutual benefit rather than one-sided assistance. Transformation magic operates through physical contact that maintains connection during underwater operation while providing communication that coordination requires, Serena explains with practical instruction that encompasses both tactical necessity and personal intimacy, whose development serves both mission success and emotional bond, whose growth operates alongside professional cooperation. Contact that encompasses both magical necessity and personal choice about physical intimacy, she clarifies, with recognition that magical assistance creates opportunities for closeness that normal circumstances might not permit, while maintaining respect for personal boundaries that consent requires despite practical necessity. Partnership that honors both professional requirements and personal feelings, Evan responds, with acknowledgement that mission cooperation encompasses emotional territory, whose navigation requires honesty about attraction alongside tactical focus, that success demands through balanced approach to relationship development within extraordinary circumstances. The preparation that follows encompasses both tactical planning and personal recognition about relationship, whose development serves both mission success and individual fulfillment through partnership that transforms prophetic obligation into voluntary cooperation motivated by both duty and desire, whose combination strengthens rather than complicates commitment to shared objectives. Equipment modification that provides underwater capability while maintaining surface functionality, he explains, while preparing gear whose adaptation serves dual environment operation, that mission requires through technological innovation that circumstances demand, despite limited resources that Boat Workshop provides. Navigation assistance that encompasses both route planning and communication protocols when underwater operation requires coordination that magical connection permits. Serena contributes with expertise that encompasses both oceanic knowledge and tactical understanding, whose combination serves mission planning that success requires through comprehensive preparation. As evening settles into night and preparation continues toward mission departure, whose timing serves both tactical advantage and tidal convenience, partnership that began through accidental rescue develops into relationship whose significance encompasses both personal fulfillment and political resolution, through cooperation that demonstrates possibility for interspecies alliance, serving mutual benefit rather than competitive advantage. The boat that provided rescue platform transforms into mission headquarters, whose resources serve both tactical preparation and romantic development through circumstances that have created unprecedented opportunity for connection between individuals whose compatibility transcends species boundaries to demonstrate love's capacity for overcoming obstacles that conventional wisdom considers insurmountable. Because prophetic encounter has evolved into partnership that serves both individual happiness and collective welfare through relationship that honors both species traditions while creating new possibilities for cooperation, proving that destiny operates through choice rather than compulsion when circumstances provide foundation for voluntary commitment to purposes larger than personal convenience. Through love that transforms obligation into privilege, the descent into oceanic depths encompasses transformation that operates beyond simple physical adaptation to encompass consciousness alteration, whose scope includes environmental awareness that underwater existence requires through sensory modification that permits navigation according to currents, pressure changes, and bioluminescent communication that oceanic civilization employs for territory. Orientation and social interaction, whose complexity exceeds terrestrial understanding. The magical connection that maintains life support during underwater operation creates intimacy that encompasses both practical necessity and emotional bond, whose development accelerates through shared vulnerability that depth pressure and alien environment impose upon terrestrial consciousness, whose survival depends completely on oceanic guidance that trust makes possible despite reasonable fear. About underwater survival capabilities. Abyssal Palace approaches through trench formation, whose geography provides both natural protection and strategic vulnerability that infiltration can exploit. Serena communicates through telepathic link that magical transformation enables, while physical contact maintains energy flow, that underwater breathing requires through oceanic magic, whose operation transcends normal biological limits. Defensive systems operate through automated response rather than conscious monitoring, she explains, with tactical intelligence that encompasses both architectural knowledge and security assessment, whose accuracy determines infiltration success through approach that avoids rather than confronts protective measures designed to prevent unauthorized entry. The palace structure that emerges from oceanic depths encompasses both natural reef formation and constructed architecture, whose integration with environment creates defensive capability that encompasses camouflage alongside physical protection, making approach difficult for beings unfamiliar with oceanic navigation, whose complexity extends beyond simple directional orientation to encompass 3-dimensional movement through water columns. Guard rotation follows tidal patterns rather than temporal schedule, Serena observes with security intelligence that encompasses both routine surveillance and emergency protocols, whose understanding permits timing that avoids rather than confronts defensive response that discovery would trigger, through immediate escalation beyond infiltration capability to resist. Trident chamber location within central spire, whose access requires navigation through multiple security layers, she continues with architectural information that encompasses both physical barriers and magical protections, whose circumvention demands both stealth capability and magical assistance that human agency combined with oceanic knowledge provides through cooperative approach. The infiltration that follows encompasses both careful navigation and tactical adaptation, as circumstances require modification to original planning, through obstacles that preparation anticipated, but implementation reveals require immediate problem-solving whose success depends on both individual capability and partnership coordination that shared danger creates through mutual dependence. Central corridor provides access while guard chamber creates observation point requiring distraction. Evan communicates through telepathic connection while assessing security arrangement, whose configuration demands tactical response that encompasses both timing coordination and individual responsibility for separate aspects of infiltration, whose success requires synchronized execution. Distraction capability through oceanic magic that creates environmental disturbance while maintaining plausible natural explanation. Serena responds with tactical solution that encompasses both practical effectiveness and security preservation through methods that avoid obvious sabotage while achieving necessary diversion of attention from infiltration route. The coordination that emerges encompasses both tactical execution and emotional trust, whose development accelerates through shared danger that demonstrates character under pressure, while creating bond that transcends simple cooperation to encompass authentic partnership, whose foundation serves both mission success and personal relationship, whose significance extends beyond immediate circumstances. Trident chamber accessed through final security barrier, Evan reports while approaching objective, whose achievement represents both tactical success and political resolution through artifact recovery, whose completion establishes legitimate authority while eliminating corrupt governance that oceanic welfare requires through constitutional restoration. Guardian entity presence requires negotiation rather than confrontation. Serena warns with additional intelligence about final obstacle, whose nature encompasses both protective function and sacred responsibility, that respect rather than force must address through diplomatic approach that honors ancient traditions. The encounter with Guardian encompasses both supernatural challenge and spiritual test, whose scope extends beyond simple security measure to encompass worthiness assessment that evaluates both individual character and mission legitimacy through examination that prophecy authorizes but personal integrity must validate through demonstration of genuine commitment to oceanic welfare rather than selfie. Advantage. Human savior whose heart serves others above self. The Guardian acknowledges after evaluation that encompasses both individual assessment and prophetic verification, through recognition that character demonstrated through actions rather than claims provides foundation for authority that sacred artifact represents. Trident acceptance that establishes legitimate governance through wielder whose commitment serves collective rather than personal welfare. The Guardian continues with formal recognition that encompasses both individual authorization and constitutional validation through prophetic fulfillment, whose achievement serves oceanic political stability. The artifact recovery that completes primary mission objective encompasses both tactical success and symbolic achievement, whose significance extends beyond simple theft to encompass constitutional restoration through legitimate authority transfer, that popular recognition will validate when corrupt governance receives challenge that ancient law specifically permits through external intervention. Extraction requires immediate departure before discovery triggers defensive response. Serena urges with tactical urgency that encompasses both mission completion and personal survival through escape, whose success depends on rapid movement that avoids confrontation beyond current capability to resist through stealth rather than combat capability. The escape that follows encompasses both successful navigation and growing pursuit that discovery has triggered through security activation, requiring evasive maneuvering whose success depends on oceanic knowledge, combined with human adaptation to underwater movement, whose effectiveness magical transformation provides despite limited experience with three-dimensional aquatic navigation. Surface approach permits transition to boat environment while maintaining artifact security. Evans suggests with tactical solution that encompasses both safety consideration and mission completion through environment that provides both refuge and platform for constitutional process, whose implementation requires oceanic participation rather than continued terrestrial involvement. Constitutional ceremony requires oceanic location where popular assembly can witness legitimate authority restoration. Serena responds with political necessity that encompasses both legal requirement and practical need for public validation, that corrupt governance challenge demands through transparent process, rather than secret political maneuvering. The ceremony that follows return to oceanic territory encompasses both constitutional restoration and personal recognition, as partnership that served political necessity evolves into permanent alliance, whose significance extends beyond mission success to encompass interspecies cooperation that demonstrates possibility for sustained relationship. Transcending environmental barriers through love, T serves both individual fulfillment and collective welfare. Legitimate authority restored through ancient law, whose prophetic fulfillment establishes constitutional governance. The Oceanic Assembly acknowledges, with formal recognition that encompasses both political resolution and individual appreciation for external assistance whose success preserves territorial sovereignty while establishing precedent for future cooperation. Human savior whose partnership serves continued alliance between oceanic and terrestrial communities. Assembly continues with diplomatic framework that encompasses both individual relationship and broader interspecies cooperation, whose development could benefit both environments through shared stewardship rather than competitive resource exploitation. The recognition that transforms prophetic obligation into permanent partnership creates foundation for relationship whose scope encompasses both individual happiness and environmental cooperation through alliance that serves both personal fulfillment and collective welfare, while demonstrating that destiny operates through choice rather than compulsion, when circumstances provide opportunity for voluntary commitment to purposes transcending individual convenience. 2 years after prophetic encounter transformed solitary fishing into constitutional rescue, the marine research station that Evan and Serena establish on floating platform represents unprecedented cooperation whose scope encompasses both scientific advancement and environmental protection through partnership that demonstrates how interspecies alliance serves mutual benefit rather than competitive advantage through shared commitment to oceanic stewardship. The research that emerges encompasses both marine biology advancement and oceanic political science, whose documentation provides foundation for formal diplomatic relations between terrestrial and underwater governments through constitutional framework that acknowledges territorial sovereignty while establishing cooperation protocols for environmental challenges requiring collaborative response. Oceanic ecosystem monitoring that encompasses both environmental health assessment and political stability correlation. Serena explains during scientific presentation that demonstrates how marine environmental welfare correlates with underwater political organization through data that validates sustainable governance approaches whose implementation benefits both oceanic territories and coastal communities. Collaborative research that encompasses both species-specific knowledge and integrated environmental understanding, Evan adds, with recognition that scientific advancement serves both academic curiosity and practical environmental management whose effectiveness requires cooperation, transcending territorial boundaries through shared commitment to ecosystem preservation. The diplomatic protocols that formalize interspecies cooperation establish precedent whose significance extends beyond individual relationship to encompass constitutional innovation that serves both oceanic sovereignty and terrestrial environmental responsibility through agreements that honor territorial autonomy while acknowledging environmental interdependence. Treaty framework that acknowledges both territorial sovereignty and environmental cooperation. Oceanic ambassador states during ceremonial signing that formalizes relationship whose development began through emergency assistance but evolved into permanent alliance serving both communities through shared environmental stewardship. Diplomatic recognition that encompasses both species equality and territorial respect. Terrestrial representative responds with corresponding acknowledgement that constitutional innovation serves both political advancement and practical environmental necessity through cooperation that transcends traditional boundaries. The family that Evan and Serena create through magical adaptation represents hope for future, whose scope encompasses both personal happiness and species integration through children whose dual heritage provides foundation for sustained cooperation between communities, whose relationship demonstrates possibility for harmony rather than competition through shared values that honor both traditions. Development that encompasses both species characteristics through genetic heritage, whose expression serves individual identity rather than biological limitation. Marine physician observes during health assessment that acknowledges unique physiology, whose monitoring provides medical advancement alongside family welfare. Cultural education that encompasses both terrestrial and oceanic traditions through integrated learning. Educational coordinator adds, with recognition that dual heritage requires comprehensive rather than exclusive cultural transmission through teaching that honors both backgrounds while creating new possibilities for identity expression. The environmental restoration projects that partnership enables encompass both oceanic territory rehabilitation and coastal ecosystem improvement through collaborative effort that demonstrates how species cooperation serves environmental health more effectively than independent territorial management, whose limitations prevent comprehensive ecosystem approach. Restoration success that encompasses both immediate environmental improvement and long-term sustainability through collaborative management. Environmental director reports during assessment that validates cooperative approach, whose effectiveness transcends individual territorial capability through shared resources and expertise. The prophecy that seemed to impose unwanted destiny has evolved into chosen path whose fulfillment encompasses both individual satisfaction and collective benefit through partnership that demonstrates how extraordinary circumstances can reveal ordinary people's capacity for extraordinary contribution, when love provides motivation for commitment transcending personal convenience. Prophetic fulfillment that encompasses both constitutional restoration and personal transformation through choice rather than compulsion. Oceanic historian documents during constitutional analysis that acknowledges both political resolution and individual agency, whose combination validates prophetic wisdom while honoring human autonomy. The fishing boat that provided initial encounter has become symbol of possibilities, whose scope extends beyond individual adventure to encompass hope for cooperation that serves environmental stewardship through love that transcends species boundaries while creating precedent for sustained alliance between communities, whose shared environment requires collaborative protection rather than competitive exploitation. Because accidental discovery evolved into chosen destiny through relationship that proves love operates beyond species boundaries, when shared values create foundation for partnership, demonstrating that heroism emerges through choice rather than compulsion, while prophecy serves possibility rather than obligation through circumstances that honor both individual agency and collective welfare in perf. ECT Harmony. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.